In January 2018, Beijing made an announcement that stunned the diplomatic world. China, a nation whose northernmost point sits roughly 1,400 kilometers south of the Arctic Circle, officially declared itself a near-Arctic state. The claim seemed absurd. Geography does not bend to political ambition. And yet, 7 years later, Chinese icebreakers patrol waters 290 nautical miles north of Alaska. Chinese research stations dot the Norwegian archipelago of Svalbard. And Chinese investment has pumped billions into Arctic energy projects that NATO members desperately tried to block. Here's what makes this story so unsettling. On paper, NATO should dominate the Arctic. 7 of the 8 Arctic nations now fly under the alliance's banner. Finland joined in April 2023. Sweden followed in March 2024. The math looks overwhelming, but the reality on the frozen ground tells a different story entirely. Russia operates 32 military installations across its Arctic territory. It fields over 40 icebreakers, including 8 nuclear-powered vessels. The United States? 3 icebreakers, total. One of them is 49 years old. This is the story of how the world's most powerful military alliance left its northern flank wide open, and how Beijing noticed before anyone else did. Before we dive in, consider hitting subscribe and dropping a like. It really helps the channel grow. Now, let's get into it. To understand why NATO's Arctic position is so precarious, we need to start with what the alliance actually controls up north. The numbers sound impressive at first glance. NATO's footprint spans 7 member nations with territory above or near the Arctic Circle: Norway, Finland, Sweden, Denmark through its autonomous territory of Greenland, Canada, the United States via Alaska, and Iceland. That is a lot of flags on a lot of ice. But flags do not win strategic competitions. Infrastructure does, capabilities do. And here the picture gets troubling fast. A January 2026 analysis by the Simons Foundation documented NATO's continuously attended military sites across the entire Arctic region. The total is 37. Norway maintains 15 facilities. The United States operates 10 sites, 9 scattered across Alaska, plus the critical Pituffik Space Base in Greenland. Canada contributes 8 installations. Denmark manages 3 through Greenland. Iceland hosts a single facility. Spread those 37 sites across a region larger than the continental United States and Europe combined, and the concept of coverage becomes almost laughable. Now compare that to Russia's position. Moscow operates approximately 50 reopened Soviet-era military posts, including 13 air bases, 10 radar stations, and 20 border outposts. The Kremlin has constructed an Arctic trefoil network of distinctive cloverleaf-shaped bases at strategic choke points. The most formidable of these, Nagorskoye Air Base on Franz Josef Land, represents Russia's northernmost military installation. Completed in 2018, this 14,000 square meter facility houses roughly 150 troops at 80 degrees north latitude, just 350 kilometers east of Norwegian Svalbard. Its runway stretches 3,500 meters, long enough to support MiG-31 interceptors and Su-34 strike fighters. The base bristles with S-300 air defense systems, Panzer S-1 anti-aircraft batteries, and Bastion P coastal defense missiles armed with supersonic anti-ship weapons. But perhaps nothing illustrates NATO's capability gap more starkly than the icebreaker deficit. The U.S. Coast Guard operates 3 polar-capable vessels. They are the 49-year-old heavy icebreaker Polar Star, the 25-year-old Healy, and the recently commissioned Storis. Russia fields over 40 icebreakers, including 8 nuclear-powered behemoths that can operate year-round in conditions that would trap American vessels for months. The U.S. Polar Security Cutter program was supposed to address this imbalance. Originally scheduled for delivery in 2024, the program has slipped to 2030. Costs have ballooned from $2.3 billion to $5.1 billion. In July 2024, Washington signed the ICE-pact trilateral agreement with Canada and Finland, aiming to build 11 Arctic security cutters by 2029. Those ships remain blueprints while Russian nuclear icebreakers continue carving new shipping lanes through waters NATO cannot patrol. The surveillance situation is equally concerning. The North Warning System, a chain of 47 Cold War-era radar sites across Alaska and Canada, forms the backbone of Arctic early warning capability. These facilities cannot detect hypersonic glide vehicles, and they struggle with low-flying cruise missiles. A 2023 congressional report found that 57 of 61 sites built on permafrost face moderate to considerable risk from thaw as the Arctic warms. Canada has committed 38.6 billion Canadian dollars over 20 years for NORAD modernization, including new over-the-horizon radar systems. Initial operating capability is not expected until 2028 at the earliest, and some estimates push that date to 2032. So here's the open question that will drive the rest of this video. If NATO's position is this weak, who's stepping into the vacuum? The answer involves a nation that, by every geographical measure, has no business being in the Arctic at all. When China released its Arctic White Paper on January 26, 2018, the document contained a phrase that would echo through diplomatic circles for years. Beijing declared itself a near-Arctic state, one of the continental states that are closest to the Arctic Circle. The statement defied basic geography. It also revealed the scope of Chinese ambition. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo responded directly at the 2019 Arctic Council ministerial meeting, saying that there are only Arctic states and non-Arctic states, and that no third category exists, and claiming otherwise entitles China to exactly nothing. The rebuke was sharp. It was also ineffective. While Western diplomats debated terminology, Chinese planners were already executing a comprehensive Arctic strategy. The white paper laid out Beijing's framework explicitly to understand, protect, develop, and participate in the governance of the Arctic, while building what it called the Polar Silk Road, connecting Chinese ports to European markets via northern shipping routes. Chinese President Xi Jinping had already declared in 2014 that China should join the ranks of the world's polar powers, setting a goal to achieve polar great power status by 2030. The Icebreaker fleet tells the story of Chinese seriousness. The Zhuai Long, also called Snow Dragon, a converted Soviet cargo ship acquired in 1993, completed China's first Arctic Ocean crossing in 2012. But that aging vessel was just the beginning. The domestically built Zhuilong 2, commissioned on July 11, 2019, can break through 1.5 meters of ice and carry 90 researchers for extended polar missions. In July 2025, the Zhuilong 2 was spotted 290 nautical miles north of Utqiagvik, Alaska, 130 miles inside the U.S. extended continental shelf. China is now developing a heavy icebreaker capable of smashing through 3-meter ice, putting it in the same class as Russia's most capable vessels. On land, China's Arctic footprint has grown steadily. The Yellow River Station on Norway's Svalbard archipelago, established in July 2004, serves as Beijing's primary Arctic research facility. The 576 square meter station at 78 degrees 55 minutes north latitude has supported more than 250 research projects and has hosted more than 660 expedition members across 2 decades. A second facility, the China-Iceland Arctic Science Observatory, opened in October 2018. Western security analysts have flagged dual-use concerns about these installations. The China Research Institute of Radio Wave Propagation operates equipment at the Yellow River Station. Swedish defense researchers warned that China's satellite ground station in Kiruna, Sweden, opened between 2016 and 2017, could complement military reconnaissance satellites. The line between scientific research and strategic surveillance grows blurrier with each passing year. But China's most aggressive Arctic play has been economic. Beijing attempted to gain footholds across the region through major infrastructure investments and faced rejection after rejection from increasingly suspicious Nordic governments. In 2018, China Communications Construction Company offered 3.6 billion Danish kroner, roughly $550 million, to build airports in 3 Greenland cities, Nuuk, Ilulissat, and Qaqortoq. U.S. Defense Secretary James Mattis personally urged Denmark to block the bid. Copenhagen funded the airports itself. The company withdrew, citing visa difficulties. The pattern repeated across the Arctic. In Greenland, Chinese company Shenghai Resources acquired a 12.5% stake in the Kvanefjeld rare earth and uranium mining project in 2016, with contractual rights to expand to 60%. Greenland's 2021 ban on uranium mining effectively terminated the project. Hong Kong-based General Nice Group's license for the Isua iron mine was withdrawn in 2021 after years of inactivity. The same company's 2016 attempt to purchase an abandoned Danish naval base was blocked by Copenhagen. In Finland, the proposed Arctic Connect subsea cable project, a 10,500 kilometers fiber optic line running through the Arctic Ocean with China Telecom and Huawei Marine participating, was halted. Helsinki pivoted to the US-aligned Far North Fiber project instead. In June 2024, Chinese investors attempted to purchase land south of Longyearbyen on Svalbard, and Oslo blocked the sale on security grounds. Where China could not invest in NATO territory, it found a willing partner elsewhere, and this partnership may prove more consequential than any blocked airport contract. Since you have made it this far, you are clearly invested in understanding what is really happening in the Arctic. Please hit subscribe and drop a like. It genuinely helps more than you might think. With that said, let us get back to it. Russia offered what Nordic nations would not: access. And China paid handsomely for the privilege. Chinese entities hold approximately 30% ownership in the Yamal LNG project, Russia's flagship Arctic energy development. China National Petroleum Corporation controls 20%, and the Silk Road Fund owns another 9.9%. Chinese banks provided a $12 billion loan in April 2016 to help finance construction. The project's total cost reached somewhere between $27 and $36 billion, making it one of the largest energy investments in Arctic history. China also holds 20% of Russia's Arctic LNG 2 project through CNOOC and CNPC subsidiaries. A June 2025 Harvard Belfer Center assessment found that claims of $90 billion in Chinese Arctic investment are highly exaggerated, mostly because they include failed investments in projects that were never built. But even the verified investments represent billions of dollars flowing into Russian Arctic development at precisely the moment Western sanctions attempted to isolate Moscow. The partnership has extended beyond economics into UN-precedented military cooperation. In July 2024, Russian Tu-95MS and Chinese Xi'an H-6 bombers conducted their first-ever joint patrol near the Alaska Air Defense Identification Zone. The mission lasted 5 hours over the Chukchi and Bering Seas. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin noted the significance bluntly. "First time we've seen those two countries fly together like that." The cooperation escalated quickly. In September and October 2024, Chinese Coast Guard vessels entered the Arctic Ocean for the first time in a joint patrol with Russia's border service. 2 Chinese and 2 Russian ships transited the Bering Strait on October 1, 2024, the 75th anniversary of the People's Republic of China. Vice Admiral Peter Gautier, U.S. Coast Guard Deputy Commandant, observed, "That's a first that just tells us that their Arctic cooperation is only expanding." By November 2024, H-6N bombers had approached within cruise missile range of Guam in what analysts described as potentially the first serious training to conduct a nuclear strike against Guam from the air. That same month, Moscow and Beijing established a new subcommittee specifically focused on Arctic shipping route cooperation. Meanwhile, Russia's Arctic military posture remains formidable despite the costs of its war in Ukraine. The Northern Fleet, headquartered at Severomorsk on the Kola Peninsula, operates approximately 33 submarines, including Bore-class ballistic missile boats carrying 16 submarine-launched ballistic missiles each, with up to 6 warheads per missile. 8 of Russia's 11 nuclear-capable submarines are based on the Kola Peninsula. The specialized vessel Belgorod can carry the Poseidon nuclear-powered autonomous torpedo, the so-called Doomsday Drone. The Ukraine conflict has paradoxically weakened Russia's ground forces while leaving its submarine deterrence intact. The 80th and 200th Separate Motor Rifle Brigades, Russia's specialized Arctic units, suffered devastating casualties. The 200th Brigade lost an estimated 50% of its pre-war manpower by the end of 2022 and was described as mostly wiped out by December of that year. Analysts estimate Northern Fleet ground force capacity has been reduced to roughly 20% of pre-2022 levels. But satellite imagery confirmed continued runway improvements at Nagurskoye and Temp bases through 2024. 3 new radomes were completed at Tixi in 2022. Russia is not abandoning the Arctic. It is just fighting a different kind of war there now. Everything collided in January 2025, when the Greenland crisis tested NATO's cohesion more severely than any external threat had managed. On January 6, 2025, President Trump said Greenland was an absolute necessity for United States national security, and he threatened very high tariffs on Denmark. Donald Trump Jr. flew to Greenland the following day, though no government officials agreed to meet him. Greenlandic Prime Minister Mute Borup Egide responded immediately, saying, "Greenland is ours. We are not for sale and will never be for sale." A January 2025 poll found 85% of Greenlanders opposed joining the United States. Only 6% supported the idea. The crisis deepened through January 2026, when Trump refused to rule out military force and announced 10% tariffs on Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Finland, France, Germany, the United Kingdom, and the Netherlands, scheduled to rise to 25% by June. European NATO allies deployed troops to Greenland in Operation Arctic Endurance. Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen issued the alliance's starkest warning, saying that if the United States chose to attack another NATO country militarily, then everything stops. The situation eased at Davos on January 21, 2026, when Trump announced a framework of a future deal with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, pledging not to use military force and withdrawing tariff threats. Reuters reported the reversal followed pressure from Trump's own aides who opposed any military action. Only 8% of Americans had supported using force for Greenland in January 2026 polling. Denmark responded not with relief, but with massive Arctic investment. Copenhagen announced 14.6 billion Danish kroner, roughly $2.05 billion, in January 2025 for 3 Arctic naval vessels and long-range drones. By October 2025, that commitment expanded to 27.4 billion Danish kroner, another $4.26 billion for additional vessels, an Arctic command headquarters, maritime patrol aircraft, and undersea cables. Total Danish Arctic defense spending stands at approximately $6.3 billion. The urgency behind these investments traces back to something no military can stop. Climate change is reshaping the Arctic faster than any government anticipated. Arctic sea ice is declining at 12.1 to 12.4% per decade. Over 95% of multi-year ice older than 4 years has vanished since the 1980s. The September 2024 minimum reached 4.28 million square kilometers, the 7th lowest on record. All 18 of the lowest September ice extents have occurred between 2007 and 2024. The IPCC 6th Assessment Report projects the Arctic Ocean will reach ice-free conditions in September at least once before 2050 under all emission scenarios. A 2023 Nature Communications study found ice-free summers could arrive as early as the 2030s to the 2050s, regardless of what emissions path humanity takes. This means the strategic window is closing fast. The Northern Sea route along Russia's coast already carried a record 37.9 million tons of cargo in 2024. The Europe to China journey via the Northern Sea route is approximately 40% shorter than the Suez route, 12,800 kilometers compared with 21,000 kilometers, saving 10 to 15 days of transit time. In 2025, the container ship Istanbul Bridge completed China to the United Kingdom transit via the Northern Sea route in a record 20 days. Remember that question from the beginning? How did the world's most powerful military alliance leave its northern flank wide open? The answer lies in decades of comfortable assumptions. NATO planned for European land wars and Middle Eastern interventions while the Arctic melted. Russia never stopped investing. China watched, calculated, and moved. And now both are operating in waters where NATO's presence remains more theoretical than operational. 7 years of Chinese near-Arctic ambition, 3 decades of Russian base construction, 4 decades of American icebreaker neglect, one alliance scrambling to catch up. The Arctic is no longer a frozen buffer zone separating great powers. It has become the arena where those powers will compete for resources worth trillions, shipping routes that reshape global trade, and military positions that could determine the outcome of any future conflict. The ice is retreating. The question is not whether this competition will intensify, it is whether NATO will close the gap before the gap becomes permanent. The race for the Arctic has already begun, and right now, the alliance is running behind. If you found this valuable, consider subscribing. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one of them. Thank you for watching.